There's a common story we tell about Pixar, a group of visionary artists sitting in a room, drawing a cowboy and a spaceman, and letting their imaginations run wild until they created a cinematic classic. But that narrative ignores the reality. In its early years, Pixar was not an animation studio. It was a struggling Lucasfilm spin-off, trying to sell high-end computer hardware and image editing software to a market that wasn't buying. By 1991, the company was hemorrhaging cash. Steve Jobs, who had bought the division years earlier, delivered an ultimatum. They had 30 days to spin off a profitable software group or face the consequences. When the 30 days were up, Jobs followed through. He fired the company president, Chuck Kolstad, and laid off nearly half of the workforce, roughly 30 employees in a single afternoon. This was not a story of creative inspiration. It was one of corporate survival. To stay solvent, Pixar needed an immediate infusion of capital, which forced them to seek a partnership from a position of zero leverage. That capital lived at the Walt Disney Company. At the time, Disney was the primary gatekeeper for theatrical animation, possessing the money and the distribution footprint that Pixar lacked. Pixar signed a co-production agreement heavily weighted in Disney's favor. Disney secured final say on marketing and distribution. The most restrictive clauses gave Disney exclusive ownership of the characters. Disney could abandon production, yet still retain the intellectual property. Pixar also carried the financial burden of production. If costs exceeded the budget, Pixar was required to pay those millions out of pocket, which Disney would then deduct from Pixar's share of future revenue. For a company on the brink of collapse, this wasn't a partnership, it was a survival tactic. They accepted a predatory contract because it was the only way to keep their technology alive. Pixar used the revenue from their early hits to build a highly optimized headquarters at their Emeryville campus, focusing on a strategy that Disney's massive internal machine could not match. They spent a decade perfecting a blended culture. By housing technical engineers and creative artists in the same room, they eliminated the traditional friction between the software development and the storytelling process. While Pixar stayed lean, Disney's animation division swelled to over 2,200 employees by 1999. This bureaucracy had a direct financial cost. Competition pushed top Disney animator salaries from $125,000 to $550,000 in 5 years, significantly eroding profitability. As the co-production deal neared its end in 2004, Disney CEO Michael Eisner attempted to maintain the status quo, expecting Pixar to remain subordinate. However, Pixar's films were consistently exceeding box office expectations, while Disney's internal projects were falling short. Recognizing this shift in performance, Steve Jobs refused Disney's terms and walked away from the negotiating table entirely. It was a calculated risk. Jobs was betting that Pixar's operational efficiency and track record of hits made them more valuable to Disney than Disney was to them. This leverage wasn't built in a vacuum. Pixar's early success stood on the shoulders of Lucasfilm's research and relied on Disney's massive marketing engine to turn Toy Story into a global brand. But while Pixar stayed successful, Disney's own attempts at 3D animation faltered. Their expensive secret lab unit produced Dinosaur in 2000, which had a strong start but ultimately failed to meet expectations, leading to the lab's closure. When Robert Iger took over as CEO, he realized that Disney's internal animation pipeline could no longer compete with Pixar's output. Disney's revenue was now heavily dependent on a studio they didn't own. Disney moved to resolve this dependency through a $7.4 billion acquisition. This deal effectively inverted the original power dynamic, placing Pixar's leadership in charge of Disney's entire animation future. Real empires are rarely built on magic. They are built by surviving a market crash, outlasting a predatory contract, and refusing to blink when the data finally gives you the leverage to name your price. If you grew up with Pixar, I linked some of the best collectibles and art books below. And if you want more stories about the business empires hiding behind the things you love, subscribe for more.